I only have like 3 slides.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay. So how familiar are you with the social cost of carbon, folks here? Have you heard of it before? Do you use it all the time? Okay, a little bit of both. So just a touch point on it. I was just gonna, give a definition.
Oh, it
And
works again. I think you just gotta point it
that way,
that
okay,
way, and
okay.
then it
Let's
works.
see if this magic happens. And then a couple examples and resources so that you can use it. And I just think the more we use it, the better off we'll be. So, what is the social cost of carbon? It's really a measurement. It's a value, and there are different values to choose from. But it's grained in this notion that there are all of these economic damages that we all know about and have talked about from climate change, whether Hurricane Sandy, which was one of my favorite things to think about for a while in my research, or the wildfires in 2020, these have real tangible effects that are not only direct, but are long lasting, are cumulative, and we should be tracking that. And again, the first presentations, there was the NOAA's billion-dollar disasters. So those graphs are really fun, and they're available at the state level, and you can actually toggle the life out of it to get interesting statistics of different hazards and what the cost implication was. So the social cost of carbon is an idea of how do we not lose that? Because if you don't measure something, if you don't quantify it, often, it's not integrated in the cost benefit discussions that have been going on today. This is an effort to do so. It's not new. It's been around for a while, and it's been kind of a product of love by a lot of scientists and economists and policy people that have been thinking, how do we capture that? So they take a combination of resources from output from global climate models that, again, are thinking about, how the future may continue to change moving forward, but also they're called integrated assessment models, and they take climate information with different sectoral economic information of what was the cost to rebuild after this event, or you can think about it differently for each sector. For agriculture, it's going to look really different than thinking about rebuilding a whole community. So it's model information. It's not accurate. It's not supposed to be. It's using past data points to think about how could we account for this ongoing and future damage over time, and start to do that now in really, really small and important decisions, right? Like, should a school bus be electric or not? How do we account for the fact of why we might be interested in making it low carbon versus not? So this is supposed to be a tool to help us think about that. And by tool, it's really, a number that can be on par with other numbers that are used in that decision-making process. So like I said, there are different potential values, and it's actually put together pretty nicely in a table. And I'll show you one at the end so that you can choose as a user based on things that you care about, your risk tolerance, how you think about equity, some things that are incredibly important and even more difficult to quantify, to give the user that power over which value of the social cost of carbon they might want to use, because there isn't one number, which is a good or a bad thing depending on how you think about it. So just a shout out to the social cost of carbon was used in Odo's planning and innovation division for their guidebook to school bus electrification. So I thought that was really great. So this is a figure. A lot of this information is resources from RFF. They have a lot to say on the social cost of carbon. They're a great resource if you want more of like a deep dive 101. So you can actually use the social cost of carbon on either side of this equation in terms of how do you say what the cost is of not having a lower carbon option, or what is the benefit of having solar panels or something in your, utilities have used this, appliance policies have used it. There's been quite a range. So you can use it as just another value. It's a multiplier, right? To give you a sense of the total package of that policy, that program, that investment. It can be applied to a lot of things, and that's by design, right? So it's scalable, it's usable, and user-friendly. This is one of the tables I mentioned. This is from an Odo primer that I worked on when I worked for the Oregon Department of Energy. So there's time periods of interest too, and you're thinking about how far ahead am I planning for, right? Are we thinking about a 30-year mortgage period? What's the design life of the investment? And so that's definitely going to increase the social cost of carbon number, because you're then thinking further down the road where even if we stopped emitting today, right, we still have these baked in emissions and impacts from our previous emissions that are going to lead to damages like the ones we've seen to date, and more so. So that's how you might see different values here, right? Those are the rows. And then there's also something called the discount rate, which is getting into that risk tolerance piece and the equity piece. So do you want to highly discount or less so, reflecting a higher value of the social costs of carbon? You can see that, I think I have a laser thing on here, the 2.5, a lower discount rate. So if you look at 2050, the last row, that's going to be different than the 33. So you're looking at the same time period, but how much you want to think about why this matters is also going to be a lever of your decision making. And I really liked, I put just a couple of examples here. The UC University has a relatively new program where they're using it for their some of their new construction or other retrofit decision making. And often when people are going to do this, they are very transparent about the number that they picked and why, because that is also a little bit of a stakeholder and a politically sensitive topic, right? As it should be, because you're thinking about how much am I discounting? How much does this carbon removal matter to me? And then, sorry for the small print, but Oregon has done some things, at least as of 4 years ago. There was, and I'm guaranteed that this have changed, utilities have used it in different ways, as well as to help guide some fleet adjustments. And there's a lot more examples in these links here. There's a long-standing argument as well that these numbers are far too low. I would agree with that. We're continuing to see massive events that often cost more than you think they do, right? Because there's the event, and then there's impacts that happen a week later, or a month later, or 5 years later, or 10 years later. I studied Hurricane Sandy, and we're still talking about that. It made such an impact to the whole region. So I just wanted to shout that out as well. So if you really were gung-ho, you probably would want to go for one of the higher numbers, knowing that that's even probably considered low. But I think it's a really great tool to use in wide-ranging applications. It hasn't gotten as far as it could or it should, but I think that that's also an opportunity to be a leader and help advocate for it. And there are really public resources that you can point to. So I just wanted to share a little bit about that at Diane's request, and happy to talk more. That's all I got for you, but yeah, I hope you use it and share your story so others can find it. Any questions?
Thank you, Maya.
Yeah.
Questions? Okay, I'll get you next. Here you go.
Could you rediscuss the premise of how you arrive at the definition of social cost? What I'm concerned about, I think, is that, it's well known that the United States contributes the majority of the carbon that's in the atmosphere that's causing the global warming. And yet, so many populations across the world, island nations, are going underwater. Many nations across the world that have people living on substandard conditions, low incomes, and so forth, and it's impacting their life significantly. Would you redefine what your definition of social cost is?
Well, I'm just literally the messenger. I can't claim any credit for creating that title, but my understanding is that it reflects the social effect of these damages, social being all of our society. So there are actually some researchers that have created even many more numbers depending on the nation. So those would be different in the US versus the Maldives or another island, and what is the impact to them. And I'm definitely not a scholar in SECC, I'm just an enthusiast. But I think that, it's the whole idea, my understanding is you want to have some way of capturing these damages, because if you're not, they're not a part of the decision making. And all of those little decisions are a lost opportunity to move us very slowly, right, along this long way that we have to go. So from where I sit, just as a human, I think we should all be using some way to account for that. I think it should be the highest number possible, and help people, still do what they need to do while accounting for the true cost. So I'm sure there's way more economists in here than me, but it's like the shadow price, right? What is that price that's not being accounted for, but it exists, right? So you need some way to signal and show it. So that's the purpose behind it. I'm not sure if you're thinking about something like it should be renamed to something a little bit more advocacy oriented. Yeah, it's just the social cost I guess, as opposed to just the economic costs, or not talking about the costs. We need to be talking about the costs. So those are just my thoughts. Anyone want to add to that, or? I think it's a conversation of how to use it and pick the number. Yeah.
I kind of missed what you had to say, but as far as the cost, translating what our costs in economic paradigm, what we think about when we value social environmental, to transactional in the private sector. How do we, like when we talk about performance, we work on sustainable finance. There's some work being done on how to take what our real estate performance metrics and have them be adjusted according to a higher performing building. How does it affect the bottom line? It still has an environmental, other social benefits, but it also translates into a benefit you can quantify with the product. So, I think there's a whole spectrum of costs, values, opportunities, and what can we capture, what are intangible or tangible. How do you make something more tangible? So
Right.
I don't know. I think it's an ongoing battle, but we need to do more.
That's in alignment with my understanding as well.
Like you talk about climate risk in Florida, if you have whole sections of neighborhoods that are no longer viable because they never were flood zones, but also they are. We have to go back and think about a new way to think about how the use of that land should be applied to something constructive economically, but also provide some environmental risk reduction, potentially, and avoid the social cost that comes with developing that same way over and over for a lot of that disaster that causes it.
And I think the people that worked closely on the first integrated working group on it would agree that it's completely imperfect, but it's an effort to put a number on these costs that aren't typically included in many decisions.
In what applications is the SCC most often used in?
Yeah, so I think, similar to EVs and a lot of these other trends, I would expect and hope more to come, but a lot has happened at the state agency level. It was born more in the federal sphere, because I think that's where a lot of this cost benefit for big projects and also investments in other countries with USAID and other grants. So I've seen, when I tracked a lot of different examples previously, a lot at the state agency level, but cities are emerging. And I really like the university example. I think it shows like this is scalable. You can include, wherever you're including a cost benefit analysis, you can think about the cost of that carbon and, with the assumptions that you're including with that, and just that knowing, it's based on research that's available, it's based on stakeholder engagement that's occurred, but definitely a long way to go. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for maybe one more question.
This is not related to the social cost of carbon, but as a climate scientist, I'm curious how you view, I think 10 years ago, the target was, to stay below 1.5 degrees warming, and like certain estimates at this point, suggest we might already be beyond that number, of 1.5 C, and you see, different kind of ways of modeling the climate future, and there's a pretty broad range. You see some kind of outlier models that might point to 5 degrees of warming, or outlier models that point to less than 1.5 or something like that. Are you seeing a convergence in the way that these models are kind of like narrowing in on a future that we can be more certain about, or are you seeing, are we approaching kind of a knowable future, or is it still sort of branching out, and is it very dependent on, changes in policy and behavior now, or are many of the mechanisms like in place to achieve one of those futures more than the others?
Yeah. Great question and comment, and just line of thinking. So there's been a lot of evolution, I should say, in how those scenarios are crafted and the models are developed. And there's models, multiple models at different research institutions across the world. And that's good, right? Because you don't want to have just one model and everyone is depending on that. So that's by design, that there's these multiple models, and they're different because they're doing physics calculations and thinking about the Earth atmosphere interactions in a slightly different way, and thinking about terrain in a different way. And now more and more we have what are called like downstream or high resolution regional ones that try and make it possible to think about a local topography in a more realistic way. They're all wrong. All models are wrong, right? But the idea is that as a field, yes, they continue to improve. And I think it is helpful. So we had they were called the representative concentration pathways. Now that then evolved into what were called the SSPs, social, like more of that social angle that have to do with, it's not just the emissions themselves, but it's also those big changes in society. So I think it's an open question for debate, is how much do we really know? I think we're learning more about the Earth system all the time in terms of that actual true range. For a long time, the high emissions pathway was talked about as worst case. Then it was criticized for being called worst case, and then it was criticized for being a little bit too high. So the goal is not to be precise. The goal is to have high confidence in these general ranges, I think, and do whatever we can within reason to get on that lower trajectory, right? Because there is that fanning out at about 2050. And, I think I made a comment earlier that we're learning more and more about how many of those emissions were saturated and we didn't experience them. We've kind of been living off of a cushy savings account, right? Because the ocean has been absorbing so much, and there's a lot of different multiple research subgroups that look into all that, and then that gets boiled into the IPCC and et cetera, and then that gets boiled into the way that the standardization of how those models are run every few years. So I don't know that I answered your question how you wanted me to answer it, but I think that we still could be much better off than not. Yeah, I think that there's still a lot of opportunity to have that lower number around the 2C and such. But yeah, thanks so much. Thank you.